Hi everyone, welcome to another reflection. It is so good to be back with you and I am so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for your support and of my work and of the ongoing support in the community. If you're a member of the Patreon community and if you're a subscriber here on YouTube and you participate just in the YouTube stuff and the podcast, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much for being here. I know that our time is limited and we all have lots of things that are competing for our attention, and the fact that you took a minute to click on this video and to spend a few minutes with me is much appreciated. We wanted to build, or I wanted to build, I'm not multiple people, we, me, moi, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit more about what we started to get into last month. In April, we started to talk about how I actually go about making decisions in my making and what that actually looks like. And this month, I thought that we would go a little bit further and talk about how slow making, like what it looks like in real life. I had this moment of realization a couple of nights ago, and Nora had come home from school really not feeling well. Part of it was nerves. She is starting to play with a new team. She's sort of in this transition phase and very nervous about it. We're supporting her as best as we can and lots of, propping her up and, making sure that we're really listening to her concerns and hearing what she's saying. And so she came home from school really nervous about the rest of the evening and how things were going to go. And she also had a headache. She hadn't drunk at school all day. It was all like sort of the perfect storm. And I was sitting there thinking about it later and going through her symptoms and how she was feeling. And we were talking about this new team and so on and so forth. And I started to realize or to think about it in relation to our making that a lot of this stuff is really quite misunderstood. And when we take a step back and we take a moment to really try to understand what the heart of the issue is and what the heart of the matter is, often it's something quite different from what we initially came in thinking that it was. And I think slow making is often that way. We sort of think of it as an aesthetic, or it's sort of idolized out there in social media in particular. Everything with social media is often like a clip or a moment, right? And it's not the full story and it's not the full picture. And day to day, what it actually looks like in real life is quite a bit messier. So I'd really like to spend some time talking about that. So why don't we start with what slow making is not? This is a great place to start because I think sometimes we don't know, we use these words, slow making, I'm not even sure what some of them are, slow baking, slow clothing. There's all these phrases out there now that are sort of to encapsulate this idea that is often then idolized and we don't really know what we're talking about. So to go back to our opening. So what is slow making not? It's not about working less. And I think that might shock some people. I think they might be a bit surprised to hear me say that. But when we're working slowly, or when we're being very intentional about what we're doing, it doesn't mean that we're doing less. And slow is not the same meaning, does not have the same meaning as a word in the English language as the word less. They're completely different. And so slow making is not less. It's not about perfection. And for those of us who seek perfection in our practice, in our lives, this can sometimes be something that we can give ourselves permission that it doesn't have to be perfect, that sometimes 80% really is done. It really is finished. And in today's world, especially with social media, I think sometimes we think that something has to be done 100%. It has to be like absolutely 100%. But in today's world with these crazy high standards, that's actually 120%. And so sometimes 80% is actually 100%. And I really use that sometimes to reframe things when I feel like I need to do more or I have to go above and beyond. It's like, well, wait, hang on a second. Am I seeking 120% or am I seeking 100%? Because probably if I've given 80%, I'm probably already at 100%, if that makes sense. Slow making is also not about having endless time. This doesn't mean that we're going to be spending hours upon hours upon hours, day after day after day, slogging away at something. So I think that's important to remember, because slow making, sometimes things do take longer, but slow making and taking a long time are not synonymous, just like slow is not synonymous with less. So let's think about what it does look like. I think slow making in my life, it has looked like returning to work in small increments. So often I'm trying to fit in projects around life. It might look like spindling at the soccer field. It might look like getting a couple of rows done while I'm waiting for the kids at the gym. It might look like doing that same thing while I'm waiting for Nora to walk home from school so that I can pick her up. It might look like trying to fit something in while you're visiting with a friend and you're waiting for them at the coffee shop and you're sitting there working away at something quietly. It might look like waiting for the pot of water to boil and you hop over and sit down at your spinning wheel for a few minutes. One of the lovely things about e-spinners is you can drag them around with you. So if you have a cart, even if you don't have a cart, if you have a lightweight e-spinner and you can drag it around with you in the kitchen and into the living room and the family room, you can often get a little bit of spinning done, even if it's like one nest of prepped fiber. That is all that is required, and you spin a little bit of it. Maybe you don't even finish it. So working in small increments, breaking big projects down into small, manageable, bite-sized chunks and integrating that into our lives. That has been key for me. Letting projects pause. This has been really important for me. I often will get to a point in a project where I just need to give it a bit of a timeout and it needs to go sit in the corner. It needs to think about itself for a little while and I need to think about how I want to continue working on it. And we just need a break from one another, and that is okay. The other thing is accepting an uneven progress. So what I mean by this is sometimes when we are in the midst of a project and we are making just a ton of progress. This is when this shows up for me most often. I'm making a ton of progress. I feel like I'm really, off to the races with something. And then all of a sudden life gets in the way, something within the project itself gets in the way, I get distracted with something, I have a deadline that I need to put that project aside to work on this other thing. And all of a sudden our progress on said project becomes comes in fits and starts. And we can make a huge amount of progress in one thing and then we have to put it aside and we have to be okay with it going on pause while we work on something else. The other thing that I've noticed is sometimes projects hit road bumps because it takes a certain amount of knowledge, or I need to figure something out, I need some brain power, or I need to talk to the community, get some feedback about it, and all of a sudden progress starts to look a little bit slower for a while. And then as I work through that road bump, or I work through that knowledge gap, or I work through that usually it's something around uncertainty where I'm not quite sure how to progress, then the project starts to pick up momentum again. So all three of these things, returning to the work in small increments, letting projects pause, and accepting uneven progress are all things that is what makes slow making in our day-to-day lives. That's what it looks like. That's why it's messy. Slowness in practice shows up with fewer projects at once. So for me, this might not be the same for you. Everybody's a little bit different. But for me, I tend to have fewer projects going at once. I tend to be able to count on one hand how many projects I have going at once. I usually have one project on the loom, one or two projects going on my spinning wheels or spindles. I tend not to have multiple projects on my wheels and multiple projects on spindles. It's usually just one or two projects. I tend to have one knitting project going at a time, and I may or may not have a fifth rogue project because I'm working on an article, or I've got something brewing at the back of my mind and I don't want to lose the thought process, or it's something that's on pause that I'm not actively working on. But generally, I only have 3 or 4 things going at once. So in my practice, fewer projects going at once is very much one of the big themes for me. And sometimes for the live stream, that looks like not a lot to share with you guys. Sometimes that looks like fewer projects, and then we get to spend more time on community participation and talking about what you guys are working on. So it's a balancing act. The other way that it shows up in practice is deeper familiarity with our materials. If we take a step back for a moment and think about the members of our community, one of the things that I would say about our community that is a tenet of our community is that people really understand what they're working with. They really, on a deep visceral level, they understand the materials that they're working with. They understand if they're working with a lot of wool, and that's been their material of choice, they tend to have a lot of knowledge about that. They know their tools. They know why they're choosing what they're choosing in the moment. That has been something that I've noticed as an undercurrent in our community right from the get-go. People really know what they have, a deep familiarity with their tools. They really know what they're working with. I would say that I'm the same way. I can wax poetic about, whatever it is that I'm working on for quite a long time with with a certain degree of familiarity, but also a certain degree of authority, because I feel like I really know those materials. I know those fibers inside and out, because I've spent time working on them. I'm not constantly jumping from one project to another and trying to just get things done, do. I tend to spend time with whatever it is. I would encourage you to do the same if that's something that you haven't developed in your practice yet, is to really try to familiarize yourself with what you're working with, not just with the materials themselves, but also with the tools. I think the last thing that really helps to ground us is how slowness shows up in our practice is through less urgency to resolve everything. There's less urgency to finish things. Sometimes we choose a project because we really just want that thing. We look at, a sweater. This is usually where I get caught up, is I see a sweater, a knit project, and I want that sweater. And then it's all about just getting to the finished project. And my friend Kristen actually recently posted on her Instagram, she was in that boat. She knit multiple versions of the same pattern, and it wasn't her most favorite knit, but it was the finished object that she was going for. When you know that and you go into a project with that mindset, you know that that's your outcome driven in that situation. And that's okay, because sometimes that's what our goals are. That's what we're looking for. But when we are just in the process and we're just embracing that, there's less urgency to finish things. There's less urgency to get to the end. And sometimes we're learning a new skill, or we're learning how to manage a new material, or we're learning a new tool. This is where it often shows up for me. I don't have to fix that learning curve. I just have to be in that learning curve. And maybe that sounds a bit odd, but sometimes we just have to be where we are. And sometimes that learning curve can be quite steep, and we just have to be in that space. And I don't have to fix it. I don't have to resolve it. I don't have to somehow magically try to I don't have to somehow magically make that go away or make that uncomfortable feeling go away. I just have to be there. And when there's less urgency, because we can embrace the process, which is sort of that slow making, we can just be there. There is a tension. There's tension between wanting progress and wanting presence. In all of my making and in all of the things that I do, there is that tension of feeling like my attention span is always being pulled in different directions. There's really good research to show that our attention spans are shortening, that we are not able to be present for as long as we were able to be present even just 5 to 10 years ago, which is a little bit scary. Most teenagers can only hold their attention for about 45 seconds, which again is a very troubling statistic. And I think we have to practice being present. But there's always going to be that tension between making progress and getting the thing done and being present in that moment. And that's part of being a creative person. That's part of engaging in creativity. And that's part of engaging in our making. We also live in a really fast-paced world, right? We're always being shown images. We're having things jump out at us. We're having things be constantly trying to grab our attention, whether it's newsletter subscriptions that pop up into our inbox, social media posts that are constantly notifying us on our phones. If I can give you one piece of advice, I'm sure many of you have already done this, turn off notifications on your phone on all of your social media apps. It's amazing how much that stuff is constantly pulling at our attention. And if you turn off the notifications, then you check those apps on your terms when you're ready for that stimulation. So this fast-paced world that we're living in, many of us are in the trenches right now with raising kids and having busy lives, having extracurricular things that we do. We all are here because we want to engage in a creative life, and we want to have these things be a part of our lives, our knitting, our crochet, our spinning, our weaving, and they take time. And we have to actively choose to slow down and sit down at our loom and to spend that time working on that piece of cloth. And you might sit there for 2 or 3 hours, realize A, you have to rip it all, that you have to unweave it all because you made a mistake. B, you've only made 2 or 3 inches of weaving progress. And C, you've been sitting there for 3 hours, and what do you have to show for yourself? That cognitive dissonance can be really difficult. Meanwhile, you've refilled your creative bucket, you've engaged in natural fibers and completely calmed down your CNS, your central nervous system, and just brought your body down, your resting heart rate comes down, you breathe deeper, you feel more present. So you've done all these things for yourself. Meanwhile, you're looking at this like inch or two of progress thinking, oh, I got nothing done. Meanwhile, you've accomplished all these things that actually give you pretty sound data points that we just don't think about. So when we're choosing these slower rhythms, remind yourself that you're choosing presence, you're choosing a slower rhythm, and we are choosing a life that sometimes goes against the norm. It goes against the grain, and sometimes that can be really hard. Especially, I find sometimes one of the difficult things that comes up for me again and again is I sometimes have other women say to me like, how do you fit all that in? I couldn't possibly fit all that in. And it feels very flippant and almost feels a little bit hurtful, but I often will remind myself that they want to fit it in and they're not sure how to do that. And so I will often say to them, well, what do you do? Like, what do you like to spend your time on? Are you a reader? I don't usually prompt them like that. I don't usually lead them, but I'll say, what are some of the things that you wish you had time for? Or what are some of the things that you do in your spare time? And usually you get this barrage of, I don't have any spare time, and I don't have any, I don't do anything else, and blah, blah. So then I'll say to them, well, like, what would you want to do? And sometimes it's something really simple. Like I'd really like to be able to go for a walk every night. And you don't have to say anything or give any advice, but sometimes them just articulating that will help to get their creative juices flowing around how maybe they could fit that in. You don't need to engage in fixing it for them. But if we can have more conversations out there in our lives about how we live slower and how we live more intentionally, I think we would all be happier for it. So, slowness as attention, not speed. How do we engage on a slower, in a slower life where we allow these things to creep into our lives and give us the moments that we need to be creative, be present, allow a little bit of progress without actually going for the end product. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast over the years. I think it's important that we come back to it again and again. This process often leads us into more meaningful work because we're giving space for this work. And I think when we engage in more meaningful work, often our lives take on more meaning. I'm here because I'm meant to be creative. I'm here because I want to lead a creative life. I want to give back to my community by being somebody who can help others lead a creative life and teach them and show them what I know. All these things help us in these busy moments and in the world that we're living in with a lot of uncertainty. This is a very intentional way of living, and I commend all of you for trying to do it, even if it's messy and it's maybe not always smooth. We all have permission to work at our own pace as our lives allow. And that's really important. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently is fitting these things in, recognizing that life is messy and that my making and my creativity is still allowed to bloom and it's still allowed to grow. And as I plan new projects and think about the colors that I want to work with and the natural fibers that I want to work with and whether or not I want to do some of the extras like fiber prep or dyeing, sometimes I just think that it's better to let that go sometimes for some projects so that I can focus on something a little bit simpler that allows my creativity to continue to grow and allows that space when life is really busy to be able to have those moments. Slow doesn't mean stalled. Once again, those words are not synonymous. It doesn't mean less. It doesn't mean stalled. Slowness means that we're growing and learning in the moment, that we're present with what we're doing. And sometimes that means that a project gets stalled. Sometimes it means it goes on hold. And sometimes it means we're just, as one of the girls from high school used to say, we're just trucking along. And it means we're just kind of puttering along. We're just making slow progress. And that is okay. So where are you in your in your process right now? What's working for you? What's not? In those messy moments in life where you just feel like you want to rip your hair out, where does creativity show up for you? Because sometimes that's when it's the most important. And sometimes, for me anyways, I need to not be creative and I need to just sit down and read a book. And that's giving myself permission that it doesn't always have to be something that I'm doing with my hands and that I'm intentionally engaging in. Sometimes it's taking a step back and opening up a book and reading and finding inspiration in other ways. So I'd love to hear how you do that. How do you find your inspiration in other ways when knitting, spinning, weaving, crochet, all of these fiber arts maybe aren't speaking to you quite the same way? And you need a little bit of a cleanse and you want to come back with a fresh point of view. I would love to hear more in the comments below. Until next time, happy spinning, happy making, happy building a creative life. This is intentional work that takes time. And I hope that you are all doing very, very well wherever you are in the world. And I will see you next month. Bye, everyone.